Okay, so we have covered the amphibian blood structure, the functions of the various components of the blood. Now, in this presentation, we will be looking into detail the structure of the blood vascular system. The most important organ it is the heart, and the muscular heart is a central pumping organ that drives blood through the closed circulatory system. And we can see that from the fish's two-chambered heart, the frog heart has three chambers, a single undivided ventricle with two completely divided atria. That is unique about the frog. Now, if you see the external features, you can see that the heart lies mid-ventrally inside the anterior trunk region, protected by the pectoral girdle. And it is reddish in color and somewhat triangular in shape, with the base of the triangle directed anteriorly while the narrow apex directed posteriorly. The heart is protected by a two-layered pericardium. The pericardial layer is thin, transparent, and the narrow cavity between the two layers of the pericardium, it contains pericardial fluid, which protects the heart from friction or mechanical shocks and keeps the heart moist and permits its free movement. Okay. Now, if we speak about the chambers of the heart, as already mentioned, the frog heart is composed of three chambers made of two anterior atria and a single posterior ventricle. So we can see that in the case of frog's heart, the two anterior atria, or what is otherwise known as auricles, they are dark colored, and it is mentioned as right and left auricles. A single posterior conical pink colored ventricle we can see posterior to the atria. The two auricles are externally demarcated by a very faint longitudinal interauricular groove. Okay, if you can see here, the interauricular groove is visible over here. You can see. So these are the two chambers of the atria and the posterior ventricle over here, and you can see the auricles are demarcated by an interauricular groove. Okay. The two auricles are clearly demarcated, marked out from the ventricle by a narrow, you can see the transverse coronary sulcus. Okay. Now, the heart of the frog, beside having these three chambers, they have two more chambers, additional ones. It is the sinus venosus. This is the sinus venosus, which are, and you can see this one, it is a truncus arteriosus. The sinus venosus, it is a triangular chamber which is attached to the dorsal side. This is the dorsal view. So this sinus venosus is a triangular chamber which is attached to the dorsal side of the to the heart. They are dark color. It is a dark colored and thin walled chamber. It is formed by the fusion of, you can see, the three major large veins. That is the two precaval vein. This is the left and the right precaval vein, and this is the postcaval vein. You can see over here. So these three veins together, it joins to form the part known as sinus venosus. And truncus arteriosus, on the other hand, it is attached onto the ventral side of the heart, and it arises anteriorly from the right to ventral side of the ventricle. Okay, so you can see this is the ventricle, and from the anterior part of the ventricle arises the truncus arteriosus, and it is a tubular chamber, and immediately it bifurcates into two branches or trunks, which we refer, and each further it divides into three arches. Okay, so or trunks. You can see the carotid arch, the systemic arch, and the pulmocutaneous arch. Okay, so when we speak about the chambers of the heart of frog, basically the heart is three chambered, two auricles and a ventricle. The two auricles are anteriorly positioned, and externally it is demarcated by an interauricular groove. This is the interauricular groove dorsally visible, and this is the ventrally visible interauricular groove. And the ventricle and the two atria, it is limited off by a coronary sulcus, a transverse groove which demarcates the auricle from the ventricles. Okay, and you can see that apart from these these three chambers, I'm sorry, we have two more chambers in the frog's heart. There is a sinus venosus attached onto the dorsal side and the truncus arteriosus on the ventral side. The sinus venosus, it is a triangular chamber which is formed by the union of three major larger vessels, that is a precaval veins and a single postcaval vein. The left and the right precaval vein and a single postcaval vein it uses to form what is known as the sinus venosus. Then truncus arteriosus, it is attached onto the anterior part of the ventricle on the ventral side. And this truncus arteriosus is a tubular chamber. And this chamber, it soon divides into two aortic trunks. Each of the aortic trunk further divides into three arches, that is the carotid arch over here, the systemic arch, and the pulmocutaneous arch. Okay, so these are the chambers which you can see with respect to the frog's heart. I hope it is clear, right? Now internally, if we see, so these are the structures which these were the structures which we can see externally. When we see look into in detail the internal structure of the heart, the internal structure, it is hollow and muscular, as in the case of any heart. The various chambers are separated by valves to keep the blood flowing only in a single direction. That is auricle to ventricle, like sinus venosus to auricle, auricle to ventricle, ventricle to truncus arteriosus. This is the route taken by the blood. And between each of the between the chambers, you can see that each of the set of the chambers, you can see that there is a valve, and the valve actually regulates the flow of blood only in a single direction. Okay. Now, auricles, there are two auricles, right and left, and they are thin-walled, completely separated from each other by a interauricular septum. The right auricle is larger than the left, and the sinus venosus, it opens into the dorsal wall of the right auricle. Okay, you can see over here. So this is the right auricle, and this is the left auricle. Okay, so I'm sorry, this is marked wrong. This is the left auricle. Okay, it has to be labeled in line should reach over here. So this is the left auricle, this is the right auricle, and you can see this is the interauricular septum, which divides actually the auricles into unequal halves. So right auricle is larger than the left auricle. Okay, and the sinus venosus, you can see it opens. This is the opening of the sinus venosus. It is on the other side. That is why it is given in a dotted line. Okay, so you can see the sinus venosus, it opens into the right auricle. Okay, the opening is into the right auricle, and it is on the dorsal side of the auricle. So sinus venosus, it opens into the dorsal wall of the right auricle through a large oval aperture. It is known as the atrial aperture or sino-auricular aperture. Okay, and it lies medially close to the interauricular septum and is guarded by a pair of valves. You can see it is almost in the along the medial line, isn't it? And it like opens close to the interauricular groove or interauricular septum. Okay, so this is the sino-atrial aperture, which actually opens the sinus venosus into the right auricle. Similarly, you can see the pulmonary vein, that is another next one you can see. So you have sinus venosus, you have the right auricle to where the blood flows, and then we have the ventricle and the truncus arteriosus. Okay, I hope the parts are clear. Okay, now we have the precaval veins. We have seen that sinus venosus, it is formed by the fusion of three major veins, the two precaval and the postcaval vein. And actually what happens is the blood from various parts of the body, it is taken to the sinus venosus through the precaval veins. So various veins, it carry blood from various parts of the body, and these veins join to form the caval vein. Okay, those veins from the anterior part of the body, it forms it joins the precaval vein, while all the veins from the posterior part of the body, it joins the postcaval vein, and the blood that is then poured into the right auricle through the sino-atrial aperture into the right auricle, and from the right auricle it is poured into the ventricle. It passes into the ventricle. Okay, at the same time, the left auricle, it receives blood from a pair of veins which are known as the pulmonary veins. You can see over here, these are the pulmonary veins. Okay, now as the name suggests, the pulmonary veins, it carry blood from the lungs, isn't it? So pulmonary vein, a common pulmonary vein, it opens into the left auricle near the interauricular septum by a small opening without valves. So unlike the sinoatrial aperture, the opening of the pulmonary vein doesn't have any valve. And both auricles open into a single ventricle by a common large okay, so here you can see. Right. So this is the auricle and this is the ventricle part, and it opens into the ventricle through a common what you call as the auriculoventricular aperture, which is guarded by the auriculoventricular valves. Okay, so this is what happens with the yeah. So you have the pulmonary veins, right? Now regarding the ventricles, if we see, the ventricle has a thick muscular and spongy wall, and its inner surface has irregular strands or ridges known as calumny. So internally you can see the ventricle, they do have certain structures, isn't it? Projecting out. This is known as the calumny, okay, calumny carni or the trabeculae. So it is known as the calumny carni or trabeculae with depressions known called as fissures. Okay, you can see here the depressions in between the calumny carni, it is known as the fissures, and these reduce the cavity of the ventricle. The flaps of the auriculoventricular valve are connected to the wall of ventricle by a thread-like chordae tendineae. So actually, chordae tendineae, it keeps the valve in place. Okay, so that is what the chordae tendineae, the function is all about. Now, when we speak about the next structure, the what you call truncus arteriosus, as we have already seen, the opening of the ventricle into the truncus arteriosus, it is guarded by three semilunar valves. You can see here, this is the truncus arteriosus, and ventricle opens into the truncus arteriosus on the ventral side towards the anterior end. Okay, and the blood from the ventricle, it flows into the truncus arteriosus over here. Okay, now this truncus the opening into the opening of the ventricle into the truncus arteriosus, it is guarded by three semilunar valves, and this prevent backflow of blood from truncus arteriosus into the ventricle. Okay, the truncus arteriosus, it is then divided into two aortic trunks, and then each of the aortic trunk is further divided into the carotid arch, systemic arch, and pulmocutaneous arch. As the name suggests, you can see that the carotid arch, obviously, it takes blood toward to the what you call shoulder region or the pectoral region, the what you call anterior part of the body. Okay, while the systemic arch, it takes blood towards the main part of the body. Okay, that is why it curves down, isn't it? It curves down and then it comes down and it takes blood towards the rest of the body parts, right? Pulmocutaneous, as the name suggests, it takes blood towards the lungs and the skin. And one thing very clear, in the case of frog, the respiration is mainly brought about with the help of the lungs as well as the skin, through the skin, right? So it is actually a branch which takes blood towards the respiratory surfaces. So this is all about the structure of heart. Okay, we'll be looking into in detail the structure of truncus arteriosus because it is a little more complicated one. We'll be looking into in detail in the next presentation, right? I hope it is clear. So we have seen the external structure of heart and the internal structure of heart. We saw that the external structure, it the three chambers plus two additional chambers, sinus venosus and truncus arteriosus, and the auricles, the two auricles or the two atria, it is being demarcated by interauricular groove externally and the interauricular septum internally, and ventricles, they are like two auricles, they open into ventricles by a common opening which is guarded by valve, and that is ventricles open into the truncus arteriosus later. Okay, so we can see this is how the blood flows. Okay, so from the various body parts, the blood flows into sinus venosus, that is the caval veins, three set of caval veins. So it takes blood to sinus venosus. The sinus venosus contracts and the valve opens to let the blood reach the right atrium. At the same time, lungs, from the lungs, the blood is taken by the pulmonary veins, which join together to form the common pulmonary vein, and it opens into the left auricle. They don't have any valve in between. From the right and the left auricle, the ventricle takes up the blood. Okay, so this is the whole circulation. Fine. Okay.